On January 20th of 2025, after Trump became president of the United States the second time around, a group of young Republicans gathered just a few blocks away from the Capitol to celebrate the direction in which the country was heading. It's Republican Coachella and Donald Trump is our Beyonce, said 28-year-old conservative influencer Javier Duroso about the party. A week later, a picture of the party appeared on the cover of New York Magazine with the headline, "The Cruel Kids Table," outlaid with the young bride as they contemplate cultural domination. As this last election shows, we are at a moment in time in which we are moving towards a more conservative culture. Not only that, but conservative aesthetics and ideals have been infiltrating pop culture for the last few years. From tradwife influencers to the clean girl aesthetic, conservatism as a cultural force is back in a real way since the 1980s. In 2025, it is cool to be conservative. And I believe this might have something to do with the current Saturn-Neptune conjunction going on in the sky. Today we will be talking about how the rise of conservatism we are experiencing might be a manifestation of the current Saturn-Neptune transit, and how it differs from the Uranus-Pluto square of the 2010s when pop culture was a lot more liberal. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, my name is Vera Collins. Welcome back to my channel. So, a few weeks ago, I was listening to an episode of Matt Bernstein's podcast, A Bit Fruity, which is called How Conservatism Infiltrated Pop Culture, which I highly recommend, by the way. And in this episode, journalists Kat Turnbush, Taylor Lawrence, and him discuss exactly this topic. And while listening to the podcast, I started to realize that this shift from primarily liberal in the 2010s to primarily conservative in the 2020s can totally be seen as a reflection of the archetypal astrological transits that have been happening and are happening during these 2 decades. So naturally, I felt the obligation to make this video to give you my interpretation of this topic and open up a discussion about it. Now, I want to start this analysis talking about the New York Magazine cover of the Cruel Kids Table, as I feel like it is such a good representation of the shift that we're seeing at the moment. So in this cover photo, we can see a fraction of the attendants at the party drinking and having a good time. What stands out is a group of 3 girls and 2 guys who seem to be looking at something, most probably a camera. But what actually stands out the most is this girl with a black and white dress, tanned skin, and a glass of wine that honestly looks stunning. We later found out that her name is Anna Claire Howland and that she is a 21-year-old college student and sorority leader at SMU University. After being featured on this cover, she quickly gained notoriety with the Republican crowd because of, again, how stunning she is. She even went on Fox News to talk about her appearance on the cover. What is interesting about this cover, as well as about the other pictures in this article, is that the people that we see here, who have been self-proclaimed as the new right, seem to be attempting to recreate the 1980s Republican aesthetic, or at the very least, create the 2020s version of it. The venue that they chose for the party, Waterworks, is this downtown DC venue with 2 stories, giant red crystal chandeliers, red velvet walls, and leather booths. It looks like something from another era. But then, as we see in the pictures, the fashion at the party can be summarized as Shein and Temu dresses, rental suits, and MAGA hats. There is something very uncanny about these pictures. This is a party that is meant to celebrate traditional American values and authoritarianism, but its aesthetic is giving influencer fashion culture, which is sort of the opposite of traditional quote-unquote conservative fashion. As Taylor Lawrence says in the podcast, the aesthetics of 80s Republicans, it was very much about conservatism and modesty and wearing your mother's hand-me-down, Brooks Brothers gown and shopping at Ralph Lauren and things like that. It was not about fashion, it was about anti-trend, and that is not what we're seeing with this new generation of MAGA. But this disconnect between the ideals of this new conservative movement and its reality is not something that we only see in these pictures. I think that another clear example of this is the recent rise of tradwife influencers such as Ballerina Farm and Nara Smith. These women are advocating for a return to the gender roles of the 1950s, but at the same time making millions of dollars with their content. I believe that paradoxes such as these are imminent when we aim to replicate the values and aesthetics of a time that is long gone. Another example of this contradiction is one that I actually found out about while listening to Matt's podcast. It is this private club called the Tuxedo Society, in which members pay 6,000 euros a year to get together in different locations and cosplay as old money and shoot old money content, which is crazy. This is clearly paradoxical, as the actual old money people are anti-social media. As Taylor says, old money is about exclusivity, and the internet is inherently not about exclusivity. It's about constructing an image for consumption. Showing off their luxurious lifestyle in social media is not something actual old money people would ever do. I think that a lot of what this conservative movement comes down to is a romanticization of the past. The reality is that the people who are doing the romanticizing didn't live through the time they are romanticizing. Most of the people who voted in this last election were not adults in the 1950s, and particularly the women in this movement, including the tradwife influencers, were not women in the 1950s. They were not around when women didn't have another option but to be a tradwife. In my opinion, the conservative movement is, for the most part, about yearning for a lifestyle that doesn't exist anymore. All of these aesthetics of the tradwife, the old money aesthetic, the clean girl, etc., are linked in people's minds to a life of stability and leisure. They represent a time in history in which women didn't have to work and had a man provide for them. What these people are doing is aesthetically trying to adopt and embody a life of leisure that does not exist in this economy anymore. As Taylor says, we live in this late capitalist hellscape. Everyone has to grind, everyone has to work, everyone has to hustle, and people yearn for a time when that didn't exist, and the reality is that that time is gone. And this is where the Saturn-Neptune conjunction comes into place. If we consider a 15-degree orb, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction started around April of 2024 and will go on until April of 2027. Perhaps the main reason why I associate the current conservative movement with this transit is that one of the keywords I would give to the archetype of Saturn is none other than conservative. Saturn is associated with the past as well as with tradition. Neptune, on the other hand, is all about idealism. Neptune takes us away from reality. In fact, it represents our urge to transcend and escape from ordinary reality. Therefore, whenever Saturn and Neptune come into contact, there can be an idealization of the past and our tradition, as well as a desire to go back to the past, either metaphorically or literally. And this is exactly what we are seeing with the current rise of conservative values. Another way in which I believe that this conjunction might be manifesting is in the paradoxical nature of this movement. One of the shadow sides of Neptune is not being able to see things clearly. It is associated with tendencies towards illusion, delusion, deception, and self-deception. Wherever Neptune is involved, there exists the possibility of there being a significant gap between what we dream of and the reality of what we have or can realistically attain. And Saturn, as I've said before, is all about tradition and conservatism. It is also about material reality and the struggles of existence. As we see in the pictures of the Cruel Kids Table issue of New York Magazine, the aesthetics of the youth conservative movement are, for the most part, a cheap-looking China-made dupe of original conservatives. And again, as I pointed out earlier, a lot of the ideals in this movement are simply not realistic to bring about in this point in time. In this way, I believe that it makes sense with the current Saturn-Neptune conjunction that both the aesthetics and the ideals that are becoming the most prominent in our society right now are, in my opinion, not actually in line with what they are aiming to represent, as well as not realistic. And perhaps the simplest and most obvious correlation between the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the current rise of conservative values and aesthetics has to do with the fact that Neptune is associated with the dreams and yearnings of the collective. Thus, it makes sense that now that Saturn, the principle of tradition and the past, has come together with Neptune, we are collectively yearning to the more traditional values of the past. Now, another thing that I want to talk about, as I said in the intro, is how this movement compares to the ones that we had in the 2010s when there was a Uranus-Pluto square. As I've already discussed, we're moving towards a more conservative culture right now, and we can see that play out aesthetically. Most of the aesthetics trending right now are based on whiteness and Eurocentric beauty standards, such as old money, the clean girl, quiet luxury, etc. But unless you were living under a rock during the 2010s, you know that that was not the case at all back then. The 2010s was the era of aesthetically stealing from Black women. Miley Cyrus was collaborating with rappers. Ariana Grande was somehow the same shade as Beyoncé. Kim Kardashian was getting built into her infamous slim thick body shape, and Kylie Jenner was in her King Kylie era. Now in the 2020s, people have declared that it is the end of the BBL era. The Kardashians are getting their butts reversed, and Ariana Grande has returned to her natural fair skin tone. In the 2010s, people were working out to get thicker. Now, in the 2020s, people are working out to lose weight. We can see this in the rising popularity of Pilates and hot girl walks, not to mention Ozempic. Not only that, but most, if not all, of the aesthetics that are trending at the moment, again, old money, clean girl, quiet luxury, vanilla girl, coastal grandmother, are all based on, again, one thing: whiteness. The Kardashians, as already mentioned, are a great example of this development. All throughout the 2010s, they popularized a body type that is reminiscent of Black women's features and are now undoing that body type into one that is thin and conforms to Eurocentric beauty standards. As Matt says in the podcast, everyone wanted to look like Kylie. Kylie wanted to look like a Black woman, and now Kylie doesn't even want to look like Kylie. It is interesting to compare pictures of Kylie in her King Kylie era and pictures of her now and see how much they reflect this shift. As Matt says in the podcast, she's dressing like an old money Lake Como princess now. Another example of this shift that I find to be very interesting is how in the late 2010s it became very popular and even expected for fashion and makeup brands to promote inclusion and diversity. We can see this with the rapid rise of Rihanna's Fenty Beauty and Savage Fenty, which became extremely successful precisely because of their wide range of products for all shapes, sizes, and skin tones. Around the same time, both Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie received backlash because of the lack of diversity in their campaigns. The Victoria's Secret fashion show was even cancelled because of the backlash it received. This immediately made me think of a very recent fashion campaign that seems to be all about exclusivity rather than inclusivity. This is, of course, Sydney Sweeney's collaboration with American Eagle, which critics argue that it has problematic undertones of white supremacy and eugenics. If we consider a 10-degree orb, the Uranus-Pluto square of the 2010s happened from 2008 to 2020. The archetype of Uranus is all about awakening, change, freedom, defiance, and rebellion. Pluto, on the other hand, is associated with power, depth, intensity, destruction, regeneration, and transformation. Thus, when these two planets come together in a world transit, it is common that we experience radical social and political change and even sometimes destructive upheaval. During these times, there tends to be a massive empowerment of revolutionary and rebellious impulses. As an example, the last Uranus-Pluto conjunction happened from 1960 to 1972 if we consider a 15-degree orb. This means that the whole decade of the 1960s was very much permeated by this energy. This decade was, if anything, one of social and political rebellion, progress, and revolution. There was a huge rise in civil rights movements, including those of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the Black Panthers. Betty Friedman's The Feminine Mystique impelled the women's liberation movement. The gay rights movement started. There was the countercultural revolution of the hippies, etc. We saw a continuation of these themes in the 2010s when, as I said before, there was a Uranus-Pluto square. Obama became the first Black president of the United States. Gay marriage was legalized in the US, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement. One of the most Uranus-Pluto things that came out of the 2010s was the Me Too movement, and we also had the body positivity movement. As we can see, it makes sense that with a Uranus-Pluto square, the 2010s had a very progressive and revolutionary, even sometimes rebellious and radical energy. And it also makes sense that now that we're having a Saturn-Neptune transit, we are experiencing a more conservative, even sometimes regressive energy. So that is all that I have for you guys today. I do want to apologize for the fact that I filmed this video in 3 different parts and 3 different days. So I know that my look changes throughout the video 3 times. Even my hair color is different in this last part. So yeah, sorry if that was a little distracting, but thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.